In Georgia, talking about the voting bill that was just signed from the governor, community organizers have threatened boycotts on big companies like Delta, Coca-Cola, Home Depot, in part from some of the information that's come from the president. In his last news conference, he said that the bill requires voting to end early at 5 p.m. And you've said, and some others said, that words matter. The bill actually standardizes voting hours by counties and adds Saturdays and Sundays voting, and it also allows extended hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So is there going to be a correction issue?
It standardizes the ending of voting every day at 5, right? It just gives options?
7 to 7 is what
it gives options to expand it, right? But it standardizes it at 5. It also makes it so that outside groups can't provide water or food to people in line, right?
But
it makes it more difficult to absentee vote. Are those things all correct?
Voting on the day of is 7 to 7, and early voting can standardize adding Saturday and Sunday. So my question is the tone going to change out of the White House? Or
the tone for a bill that limits voting access and makes it more difficult for people to engage in voting in Georgia?
No, that's actually not what the governor of Georgia has said.
Well, I think that is not based in fact what the governor of Georgia has said. So no, our tone is not changing. We have concerns about the specific components of the package, including the fact that it makes it harder and more difficult for people to vote by limiting absentee options, by making it not viable, not possible for people to provide water to people who are in line, by not standardizing longer hours. So if you're making it harder to vote, no, we don't support that.
This is Jen Psaki sparring with Fox Business's Edward Lawrence. Now, Jen is tackling the crux of his question, which basically amounts to asking whether the tone of the White House will change because he suggests that the White House is mischaracterizing the Georgia bill, SB 202, that was signed into law. Lawrence's question is in line with the broader Republican talking point that, in fact, the Georgia law doesn't amount to voter suppression, which, just so we're clear, it does. Here's why. First, if you've heard anything about this law, you know that it makes it illegal to hand out food or water to people standing in line to vote. So let's work backwards. Who would be in need of food or water? People who've been waiting in line for a long time. What people have been waiting in long lines? Statistically, it's people of color. Like, for example, those overwhelmingly black voters in Fulton County, Georgia, who waited 8, 9, 10, 11 hours in line to vote. So when you criminalize handing food or water to someone who will need it, then guess what? That is a method of discouraging them from standing in that line to vote. That is voter suppression. The law also allows any individual to file unlimited challenges to the eligibility of a voter. It limits the number of drop boxes. It applies voter ID laws to mail-in ballots. It creates a fraud hotline so that people can issue anonymous tips about what they suspect may be fraudulent behavior, a nod to the non-existent fraud that Republicans claim without evidence occurred in the last election. And here's the most insidious provision. So normally, election issues in Georgia are adjudicated by county boards of election. But now, the state board of elections can simply decide that those county boards aren't performing well, and they can replace the entire county board with an administrator that they chose at the state level. But it gets worse, because the Republican-led General Assembly also now has more control over that state board, in that instead of appointing 2 members of the 5-person board, they can now appoint 3 members of the 5-person board, meaning that they've given themselves the ability to control that board with the people that they've appointed. In other words, Republicans now have full power to decide whether or not certain ballots will be disqualified if they decide that there's fraud, since they have the final say in adjudicating these issues. So whereas they cried fraud in Fulton County in 2020 and nothing could be done because there were barriers in place to protect the voters, Republicans have now effectively made themselves the gatekeeper to those barriers. All of that is to say that yes, this bill is unequivocally intended to not only enact more barriers than it purports to dismantle, but sets the stage for Republicans to usurp power for themselves if they see fit. There is no planet on which they wouldn't have moved forward to challenge and try and overturn the election results if these measures were put in place during the 2020 election. The point isn't some expansion of voting rights. The point is a power grab and putting the final say in the hands of partisan legislators instead of the people of Georgia. So if any change of tone is in order, I can assure you that it's not from the White House. Now, what Edward Lawrence seems to be referencing here is a quote by Joe Biden from a few days ago where he said, quote, "Among the most outrageous parts of this new state law, it ends early voting hours so people can't cast their vote after their shift is over." Now, technically, just on the issue of early voting hours, it's not true that this new law would reduce hours, even though it doesn't necessarily expand them. What the law does is standardize 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. hours at a minimum, while giving counties the option to vote 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. if they choose. For a number of counties that already offer that, there won't be a change from the last election. But in fact, some rural counties in Georgia hadn't even been open the full 8-hour day, so implementing a standard 9 to 5 schedule actually expands hours for those counties. Now, what Biden was saying was that those counties that don't expand their hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. will make it difficult for people to get to the polls if they're only open during the same hours that they work, which is why standardizing hours from 7 to 7 would be better than 9 to 5, which of course is common sense, but leave it to Fox News to find any sentence they can parse in their desperation to make a mountain out of a molehill. With that said, what Edward Lawrence said here and what he was referencing here were not the same, because the way he explained it suggested that all voting was expanded to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., when that's not the case. Counties only have the option to extend it if they want to. And then he asked, based on that poor framing and understanding of the bill, whether the White House was prepared to change its tone. And so of course he got dismantled by Jen Psaki. The fact is that Fox is hoping to just catch the White House with some slip of the tongue and make that the story, while ignoring the fact that SB 202 will overwhelmingly make it more difficult to vote in the state of Georgia. If they were actually interested in the facts, they would acknowledge that instead of trying to land some gotcha moment that never materializes. But they're not interested in facts because they are a propaganda arm for the Republican Party, and the Republican Party's sole priority here is to make it difficult to vote because lower turnout equates to better results for Republicans. That's all. Let's be honest here, this isn't about adjudicating any fraud issues, because those issues were already adjudicated in over 60 court cases around the country, and there were no more than a handful of instances of fraud out of the more than 155 million votes cast in the last election. It's not about election integrity or election security, because there is no lack of integrity or security as it currently stands. Bills like SB 202 in Georgia are solutions to imaginary problems. They are voter suppression bills parading as election security bills because the GOP doesn't want to change its message, so it's trying to change the electorate instead. And look, these efforts will inevitably be challenged. Mark Elias, the Democrats' top election lawyer, has already filed suit on behalf of a few organizations, including the New Georgia Project and Black Votes Matter. And of course Democrats need to figure out how to reform the filibuster and pass the For the People Act, which would afford states like Georgia federal protections to counter these Republican efforts. But beyond all of that, consider too that by doing this, Georgia Republicans have just woken up every Democrat in the state, and there is no better way to make sure that someone votes than by trying to prevent them from voting. If you try to steal people's rights, they'll work that much harder to get them back. Georgia Republicans are about to learn that the hard way. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell. And please subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I not only break down the biggest stories of the week, but I also interview major players in the world of politics, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, Jamie Raskin, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.